welcome to the ad hoc committee on the 2024 Olympics. Very pleased to be joined today by the Vice Chair Gilbert Cedillo, members Bob Blumenfield and Curran Price. So, Madam Clerk, we can begin. You want to read the item that is before us?
That is a joint report from the City Administrative Officer and the Chief Legislative Analyst relative to an update on proposed financial risk management measures for the 2024 Summer Olympic and Paralympic Games.
Okay. Why don't we start out? Let me get the CAO and the CLA's office to come forward. I thought we had a very good meeting the last time, laid out a series of questions and concerns. Your two offices were already on top of it, had a feel for the kinds of things that we wanted to get answers for, and you've done that. Do we want to get Big Jim, City Attorney's Office? You want to come up to the table as well? And I also want to thank you for working very hard to get this report out earlier so that individuals had opportunity to review it. So this committee is grateful. So with that said, why don't you guys start?
Certainly. Good morning, Miguel Santana, City Administrative Officer. We submitted a report that really provides an update on where we are in thinking about the what-ifs. We're all hoping that we get the Olympics and that we certainly expect it to be very successful, but it's our collective responsibility to think about the potential of things not going as planned and making sure that we have a process and a structure in place to address issues as they surface. And so this report provides you a framework that we're operating under and is recommending that we enter into an MOU with LA24 and ultimately the OCOG that will memorialize a series of discussion points for the event of any circumstances that happen beyond our expectation. And the way we're approaching this is by really thinking about it in a tiered fashion. The first way the city will be involved in decision making is to make sure that we have representation on the OCOG Board of Directors. And there's a minimal number of directors that is expected. We were recommending that the city include representation and that representation be proportional depending on the size of the organization itself, not just on the board but on the executive committee. We also are recommending that we ensure that there's strong management. We've been very fortunate that our counterparts in LA24 have taken this issue seriously. They are as concerned about these questions as we are, and we are hoping that that continues, and we anticipate that. We've been very involved in understanding their budget, and they've taken a conservative budget approach, really thinking about things in a conservative way, not just for venues and events that are happening within the city, but also happening outside of the city. We're also proposing that there be a sizable contingency should there be cost overruns ranging between 10 to 15%, and our MOU would create that expectation. We also want to be clear that our MOU establishes the role of your council during certain circumstances, including any changes of venues that are within the city itself. What role would the council have in authorizing or at least being informed of those changes? We also have in our MOU a requirement for indemnification for all venues, including for venues within the city as well as those outside, so that ultimately the city is not accountable for anything that happens inside of those venues. We are doing an independent review of the LA24 budget, not just for the immediate. We hope to have that before you in December, but also on an ongoing basis. Should the city be awarded the games, we want to make sure that there's a mechanism on a regular basis that your council is informed as to the status of the budget, and it's being done independently.
Let me jump in. Time frame on the budget, I thought I heard mid-December.
We were working on
We really need you to try to shoot to get that towards the beginning of December.
Yes, we heard that this morning. We'll have to make adjustments to our schedule to make that deadline and have our consultants work extra hard, particularly around the Thanksgiving holiday, to make sure to meet that deadline. We are ensuring that there's a very comprehensive insurance program related to the games. There's a number of products that the LA24 intends to purchase. The city's risk manager is involved in making sure that they are inclusive of a number of different scenarios that may occur within various venues, both within the city and outside the city. And then finally, as you know, there's a $25 million state guarantee that comes, $250 million state guarantee that comes into effect after the city participates in addressing any shortfalls.
Explain that. Go into that. I mean, because it's $250 million in the event that the city's has paid $250 million. So this is walk us through that. So we have to be $250 million that we have to take care of, and
Yes.
then this comes in after that, correct?
Correct. After all of the other revenues that have been earned through the Olympics have been exhausted, after the city has contributed its $250 million, and after any insurance and other matters have been resolved, then the state contribution would come in at $250 million, up to $250 million. So they're at the back of the stack.
So with that, we'll be happy to answer any further questions. But that summarizes sort of our approach. We're hoping to have the budget analysis, LA24 budget, the MOU, all completed within the deadline that you just laid out.
Well, I saw Mr. Blumenfield grab his mic. So does that mean you have a question, or you just wanted to move it from your face, or?
A little bit of both, but I always have some questions. And I was going to follow up and better understand the question that you were starting with, the $250 million question. One, does that mean on the $250 that we would be essentially responsible for, that we could then insure ourselves against that $250 because it's a known quantity? Is that something we would be planning on doing?
There's a number of insurance products that will cover various elements of the games that LA24 will include. Our MOU will ask that they do that, and we're looking at sort of as comprehensive of a list of what-ifs. We could certainly look at that specific question. We would have to sit down with our risk management team to determine if there's an ability to purchase that kind of product, but we could certainly look into that.
And then if we did, obviously we would want to make sure that whatever the insurance company pays out is counted against our $250, and that the state doesn't come and say, well, insurance paid $250 and you ended up having to do $50 out of pocket, so we only owe X amount. I just worry about how that all looks at the end of the day, and it's like Hollywood profits on big movies, these amazing movies that don't make a profit. It's all in the accounting. And I know that you have our best interest at heart, but it'd be nice for us to see how that all lays out, to have a little sense of.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
We will look into that.
We've been joined by Mr. Paul Krikorian. Any other questions? Why don't you talk to us a little bit about, I think we touched on this last time, about the other cities that are going to participate, and, how are things going with us trying to get agreements with them and what have you?
Why don't we invite Brian Nelson to join us from LA24 to
Let's
provide an
do
update.
that. Let's invite Brian. You're invited, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members
Morning.
of the committee. Good morning.
So give us an update on where we are.
Sure. As described, we really appreciate the ongoing working relationship with the city on all of the risk mitigation factors, and we look forward to talking to you more about our budget and, of course, this MOU the next time we meet. We also have here today our insurance consultants that can directly answer that question, sort of about how we minimize liability to the city for those venues that are happening outside of the city of Los Angeles. Most directly, I mean, there are obviously a couple of ways. One, always, as the CAO noted, you all will be on our board, so we'll have a role in all of the decision-making that the OCOG does. Number two...
Spend a little bit of time on that.
Yeah.
You know, on that we will all have an opportunity to be engaged in the decision-making. You're talking about where we're ultimately going to be placing these
City
premier
representatives
events. Yeah,
on the
because this is, you know, we want to share, we understand this is the United States, this is California, this is LA, but we're the ones that are doing the lion's share of the lifting. So we want to make sure that we highlight this great city that we all represent and we love. So we do want to say, or at least be able to give our opinions where it relates to where these events will be. So if you could spend a moment on that and then go back into the financial guarantees.
Sure, absolutely. The International Olympic Committee actually requires that the city provide at least one representative to our board, the host city. Obviously, we'll have an executive committee of the board, which the city is requesting representation on, and I've been authorized to say that is, we think that's entirely appropriate. The executive committee of the board, like any nonprofit board, will be the most active members of the board and the governance of the entire OCOG. They'll be regularly updated and participating in every major decision that the organizing committee makes, including decisions related to venues. We've also discussed with the city, to the extent that there's a specific committee on venues, given the city's interest in venues, that there would also be city representation on that committee as well of the board of the OCOG, to ensure, again, that the city's voice is at the table in every conversation about those decisions, reflecting the concerns and interests that you just raised, Mr. President.
Okay.
And the issue, you know, as we're negotiating, the question that we're negotiating is, how do we ensure that the city's representation is proportionate to the size of the board itself? Because there's a minimum number of seats that are required, but there's no maximum. So certainly one or two representatives from the city represents a certain voice in a board of 20 versus a board of 100 or 50. So that's one of the issues we hope to resolve in the context of our MOU.
So are we talking about staff, or are we talking about members of this committee?
It would be city representatives, so it would be determined by the elected officials who would be representing the city's interests.
Okay.
And just on that point, actually, as part of the bid city agreement, we've committed that the executive committee wouldn't be no bigger than 18 people.
Okay.
Let me just add one more thing,
Hey,
if
Jim.
I could. In terms of protecting the city, we are negotiating with the LA24 in our MOU to have a specific clause that means no one will be a third-party beneficiary. Now, I don't mean to get in the weeds too much, but in many contracts, someone who's not actually a contracting party can argue that if the contract is breached somehow, that individual or entity is a third-party beneficiary. We're going to make it specific that that's not true. So I don't think there's going to be a hook, if you will, Mr. President, for other cities to come after Los Angeles legally.
Okay.
And then sort of the last piece tying all of that together is the insurance. So we would have a package of insurance, and we have Mintz Levin here, Heidi Lawson, who put together our proposed insurance package that would have public liability and indemnity insurance as part of that, very significant, far above the sort of $10 million per venue that that I know is required by the city generally. That would, to the extent a third party, be it a city or anyone else, did decide to bring litigation against the city, that litigation, the defense costs, and any judgment would be completely covered by the insurance package.
Okay. Members? Mr. Price.
I got a question. Thank you for the update, and I'm excited that we're moving forward in I think a very methodical, organized way. Question on the advertising control and anti-ambush measures. I'm just kind of curious. And I guess we're tying up these venues so that they can be available for advertising during the Olympic period. Is that by the committee, or it's going to be sublet out? How does that process work?
Yeah, that process is going to involves, which we've been doing for a while now, talking with the city and the owners of the various billboards and outdoor advertisers. As you all know, there are only a handful of really big ones that control most of the stock in the city of Los Angeles and the surrounding region. And then it just involves negotiating with them for option agreements to allow the Olympic sponsors to purchase that advertising space. So that's the process and the sort of plan as we now have it.
But I'm saying, they're going to be made available to anyone who wants to advertise, or
No, it's part of
associated with the games only, or how does?
Right. So we're only talking about space within 500 meters of sort of the major Olympic venues and the major thoroughfares within the city. So we're not trying to lock up all the ad space in the entire city, but for that space, it would be made available first to the Olympic sponsors, so domestic and international.
And we're just a pass-through, or we mark it up 10%, or it's just a courtesy, we reserve it for them, or what's the arrangement?
This is a good question, and I think that's still subject to ongoing negotiations.
Thank you.
Mr. Krikorian?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm still a little unclear, frankly, on the role that some of our sister city, well, I shouldn't say, some of our adjacent cities have in sharing risk in this. If we're going to have venues that are outside of the city of Los Angeles, and yet we are the signatory host city, which is the financial guarantor of this, other cities are sharing in the benefit, other cities are deriving local tax revenue, are controlling to some extent the venues that we're choosing to be in. And I guess I want to know how we can ensure that other cities share in this risk if we are the only host city signing the host city agreement.
The way we're approaching this is through the MOU to create a set of expectations as to the role of LA24 and the OCOG in absorbing that risk and the relationship between them and another city. So the first layer would be is requiring that the actual venue itself be insured and what kind of insurance that should be. And so our MOU is going to lay out a series of expectations as to the kind of insurance that venue should have. The second is creating indemnification for the city for any activities that occur or cost overruns that actually occur in a venue outside of the city of Los Angeles. The third is...
Sorry, that's an important... Indemnification by the local city for any cost overruns relating to that venue, indemnification of the city of Los Angeles?
Well, specifically for the venues itself. So the venues like the center in Carson, for example, there would be whatever happens within that venue. The expectation is that they will be responsible for any cost overruns or anything associated to that venue itself.
So reduced ticket sales, casualties that happen, unavailability of the venue, anything that results in a cost to the bottom line of the Olympic Games, which we are on the hook for $250 million for, will be borne by the city in which the venue
Well, we
is
could have the
located.
insurance representatives come and walk you through that.
All the potential problems you just identified, Mr. Corrigan, are covered by various parts of the insurance package.
Right, but I get the insurance, but that's the same for regardless of where the venue is. It's the same in Los Angeles, it's the same there, and so on. But after you get to the uninsured liability, it's all 100% on the city of Los Angeles. That's what I'm getting. So the insurance is kind of irrelevant to this discussion because our venues are insured as well. I want to get to, I'm trying to understand, once you exhaust the insurance, it's all on the taxpayers of Los Angeles.
Well, we're trying to create a series of expectations that the insurance is covers broader than just venue-specific activities. You talked, for example, the issue of ticket sales. If for some reason the sales don't reach the mark that was anticipated or projected, we were informed this week, there are actually insurance products that we're anticipating be purchased to cover that loss.
We also are going to have excess coverage. I don't think it's a likely potentiality that the insurance coverage would be insufficient to cover any liability, as we understand it from the insurance people.
But yeah, right, Jim. But you and I both get paid to anticipate what's not likely. The likely stuff is easy. It's the unlikely stuff that we have to be careful about. And right now, the model is that the city of Los Angeles bears 100% of that risk. And maybe we decide that that's worth it. But I just want to make sure that I understand that that's the case. And
we have our insurance person here if you have specific questions about the insurance package. The approach with our partner cities has, as Mr. Santana indicated, has been two things. Really lowering the city's risk as low as we possibly can. That's number one. So to ensure that there's not a question or concern about other cities taking on liability because we've lowered the risk in a way that you all can feel comfortable to go forward with the games. So that's always number one. But it does actually, the other cities' insurance and the venue insurance and the fact that we're using existing venues does actually impact the risk profile because, as you noted, they all also have insurance around those venues. So that means we will get better and broader coverage when we go out to get insurance sort of over the entire games concept and plan in all of the venues. And that actually will have a beneficial budgetary impact on the OCOG overall.
Okay, and so I think if you think about it, the way we're trying to structure it, so it's a tiered sort of approach where at the bottom of sort of a multi-layered process is the city, and then behind us is the state. And so ultimately, before the city is accountable, the OCOG is accountable. And so they're as concerned, if not more concerned than we are, ensuring that they have a comprehensive insurance program as well as indemnification clauses in the venue agreements to protect them and ultimately the city of any responsibility.
Sorry, I get all that.
Yeah.
But honestly, that's a separate set of issues. That's an issue of the risk profile of the games overall. What I'm saying is, right now, there are venues outside of the city that other cities are going to benefit from, and we bear all of the risk vis-a-vis those cities. Those cities bear no risk. We bear all of the risk. And so that brings me to my next point, which is the governance point. And it seems clearly that the OCOG board is going to be big. I'm gathering if the executive board is going to be 18 or more, certainly the overall board of directors is going to be big. I think it's imperative that the MOU include a governance scheme that has robust enough representation of the city of Los Angeles to reflect the fact that we are the ones bearing that risk. And I think one is required, but that's not going to be enough for me. We have to have enough control over the decisions that are being made to protect the interests of the taxpayers of Los Angeles, number one. If there's going to be venue changes, for example, or decisions made by the city of Inglewood over its venue or the city of Carson over its venue, we need to have a role on the board to be able to say yay or nay to that, because we're going to be the ones on the hook for it. So to me, that I'm going to take more comfort in knowing that there's a significant representation of the city's elected representatives on that board to be able to anticipate the unanticipated and respond to it when the unanticipated comes up. And then lastly, I guess related to all of that, is we're going to have an MOU. We're going to look through that with a fine-tooth comb when it comes back, and I'm sure it's being, very carefully negotiated right now. But I guess I have a general question of the enforceability of that, because once in February of next year, we're signing on the dotted line, and we're sort of on the hook for this. So how do we ensure enforceability of all of the terms of that with a 501c3 going forward, when we, the leverage of whether or not we're going to be the host city or sign the host city agreement is now gone. The sword of Damocles has fallen. So where's our enforceability leverage there?
Well, enforceability is the same leverage you have in any contract, and that is you go to court. If what you're asking, Mr. Krikorian, is if the OCOG is bankrupt and goes out of existence, we certainly would win, but we wouldn't get anything. That's right. Just any time a defendant is judgment-proof, I think that given all the protections, that's very, very unlikely. But you're right. We have to think about the unlikely. But I don't know what we can do if an entity with which we have a contract ends up being unable to fulfill its part just as a matter of fact.
So, Mr. Krikorian, what I'm hearing you saying, this is very helpful because you're giving us instruction as we enter these negotiations. When we come back, there are three primary questions that you will be asking when we return with the actual MOU.
That I've thought of so far.
Yeah, so far, right, and I'm sure there'll be a host of others that you're welcome to send us through email. The first is what role will the cities that are not the city of Los Angeles bear in any risk associated with any activities that take place in their cities, not just the venues but the actual cities themselves. Second, what the expectation is that the city of Los Angeles representation on the OCOG board would be significant in light of the fact that the city is ultimately accountable for any cost overruns. And third is we need to be able to answer how will this be enforced, and how can that enforcement mechanism be strengthened.
And by the way, just as an aside, in responding to all of those things, probably the 84 experience would be instructive to us because we had all the same issues then. So, right? So it would be helpful, and I don't know what we did back then, so it would be helpful to know that in terms of risk sharing with the other cities and enforceability and so on.
Thank you.
Okay, a couple of quick things, because Mr. Krikorian got me thinking here. When you begin to have conversations, again, we'll use the city of Inglewood just for discussion purposes. Do we sign, or is there an agreement signed with the city of Inglewood if they're hosting?
Yeah, every venue city has to make the same sorts of guarantees that the city of Los Angeles is making in terms of providing city services and adhering to the Olympic Charter and those sorts of things. So the city of Inglewood and Carson and Long Beach and the other venue cities have provided those guarantees to the IOC.
And so then at the end of the day, there's a document that's signed by you guys in the city or what have you.
For certainly in terms of those guarantees are made to the IOC, so we're not a party to those guarantees. But in addition to that, much like the city of Los Angeles, obviously to the extent that there's any city-controlled venues that we're seeking to use, that would result in a full venue use agreement that the city...
So I got lost a little bit then. So if we are in negotiations with them, trying to put together an agreement, in those negotiations, we don't incorporate the liability where they, because again, to hear the conversation that went back and forth between you and my colleague, Mr. Krikorian, it would appear that at the end of the day, it's on us. And I don't quite understand that.
On a liability perspective, definitely not on you. Again, from a liability perspective, we'll have insurance to cover the city's liability. So there's not a we think we've identified, and we're presenting a very, very robust package of protections to protect the city of Los Angeles, the OCOG and the city of Los Angeles, on a liability level in all sort of terrorism, earthquake, if you have to move a venue out, if our ticketing sales are lower than we anticipate, any of those things at any of the venues, whether they're within the city of Los Angeles, outside of the city of Los Angeles, we have an insurance package that we're proposing to cover that type of liability to the city. In addition to that, we're going to enter into municipal services agreements, obviously, with all of these cities, and we'll do that in conjunction with the city of Los Angeles to ensure that those agreements are consistent across all cities so that there are not undue funds or categories of services that other cities are requesting that would create some sort of financial liability to the OCOG that could then redound back to the city of Los Angeles. So all of this work is to lower the risk profile as far as we possibly can, understanding, of course, always first in mind that at the end of the day, the city of Los Angeles, to the extent there are overruns, would be on the hook. And that's been the approach that LA24 has taken. How many risk mitigation, starting with our budget, making the budget as tight and fiscally responsible as we can, oversight, governance, the MOU with the city, insurance.
Because I really, as we move forward, I think we want to review all of that and make sure that that is as tight as it could be. When we Big Jim?
Just this. Part of the reason we hired an independent consultant to review the budget on behalf of the city is to try to give the council, the mayor's office, the citizens, the taxpayers of Los Angeles, as much comfort as possible that the budget that's been designed by LA24, in fact, has all these guarantees in it that it's, again, unlikely, very unlikely anything will ever rise where our guarantee will be called upon. So KPMG will be giving this council a report through the CAO's office and analyzing all of that. So I think you'll be able to make a determination as to whether you're satisfied in that too, Mr. President.
Okay, now my last thing is I have the highest respect and trust in you, Jim. You are not just a good attorney committed to the city, you're a friend. I could say the exact same thing for you, Mr. Santana, and the exact same thing for Ms. So, who's not here. So I really cherish your counsel. Several months ago, the four of us sat in somebody's room somewhere and we began to talk this whole thing through. And there were a series of concerns that the three of you had. So I kind of want to ask, at least the two of you that are here, how are you feeling today where it relates to how we've moved on this committee and the protections that we have in place? If you can compare it to what it was back then. So I guess I'm trying to feel how high has your comfort been elevated and how far have we come? Because you guys remember when we set up, and a lot of the things that I'm asking you to do are things that you suggested that I asked. So how do you feel today?
I think optimistic would be the way to, because some of these things are not tied down yet. But the direction we've been moving in, the cooperation of LA24, which has superb management and everything, operationally, financially, and legally, I think we're going to be in good shape. We're never going to get past the fact that the IOC will require some cost overrun guarantee for the city. and that remains a concern, and I don't think that we won't get the games if we don't do that. So that concern, Mr. President, cannot be answered. But I just have to make it extremely unlikely that we're ever going to face that.
Thanks. Miguel?
And I would add that I think the city's come a long way. I think this process of your committee being transparent, surfacing the issues as your members have, the MOU itself is going to codify a lot of the concerns and create a process for dealing with issues as they surface. Your council has made it very clear that you don't intend to just say yes to the games and then just go away, that it's through this committee and through the council's involvement, it's been very clear that you're very interested in both the good and the things that we should be concerned about, and are protecting ourselves from those possibilities. And so I think the MOU itself will really be a very valuable document, because it should lay out all the issues, and so at the end of the day, whatever risk does exist, that we're being transparent about that risk to the council and to the public, but that we've created a process in which that risk is very minimal, and I think that's the biggest element of progress that I think we've seen over the course of the last several months in the context of these deliberations.
Okay. Mr. Blumenfield, I see you out of the corner of my eye.
Got a little angle here, so that's good. Great discussion so far, and like everyone here, I'm excited about the prospects. I'm coming back to the question I was originally asking. I still don't have my head around how the state insurance base, or the state 250 works in terms of, when I think of ours as our first 250 as a deductible, can we insure against that deductible? And can we do things so that basically we're minimizing what our deductible is, or does everything that we do to hedge our deductible basically make the state 250 further off in the distance from being paid out? Am I thinking of that in the right way, or am I using the wrong analogy in terms of?
I think the way to think about it is that, and we'll we hadn't thought about it, at least certainly I haven't, in the way you framed it. But if there's going to be a series of protections that the city will have, and then after all of those protections are exhausted, including the insurance, the contractual relationship between the Olympics and the various cities and venues, if the city is still ultimately on the hook for covering $250 million, and I would see that as having to pay from our general fund $250 million. Once that's exhausted, then if the liability is greater than $250, then that's when the state piece kicks in. And so, but we will examine the language of the legislation, identify if there's ways that the city could insure itself from that $250 million liability. That would be insurance that we would probably have to take, but we could certainly sit down with our risk manager to determine what that would look like, and respond to it specifically when we come back to you.
Let me go back to Mr. Weston's question for a second. A couple things that have changed, Mr. President, is we've had a lot of budget workshops with LA24 they put on, which has certainly made me feel a lot better about the way they're going to budget. But most importantly, almost nothing has to be built. At the time we were talking to you, we're potentially $1 billion project to build an Olympic Village. Now it's
Yes.
at UCLA. That really has, a lot of the cost overruns, as I understand it from the Olympics experts, have been constructing new venues, constructing the Olympic Village, constructing a media center. All of that is already here.
Okay.
Another question, more of a fun question. How did the formal presentation from LA24 to the IOC, how did that go in terms of the changes, the venue changes?
I think we have not received their formal feedback yet, but we feel good about it. Obviously, not obviously, the public reaction, I think, has been very, very positive to the sport parks concept, and we've gotten good input back in from both the international federations and the athletes. So we feel good about the changes, and we think they are sort of budget relieving in many respects, and also makes for the best possible presentation of the games. This month, we are doing our first international presentation to the IOC. That's going to happen in a week and a couple of days. That will happen in Doha, Qatar. So most of the team is headed out there in the next few days, and then we'll be sitting down with the IOC staff to talk through both the Stage 2 presentation and then their expectations with respect to the February submittal. And then everyone, or a subset of that group, heads to Tokyo to get an after-action report on the Rio Games. So it's a busy month, but we'll have lots of IOC interaction, and we'll be very happy to present all of our report on all of that to you next time we see you in December.
And are there things on the positive? I mean, we're obviously doing our due diligence here to hedge against all the potential problems, but are there things that we should be doing as a city to help boost our standing as a potential Olympic city?
From my perspective as sort of the lawyer and the working relationship with the city and just the sort of continued support of the city and publicly and privately, there's nothing more we can be doing at this point. I think this has been a great opportunity. This process has been an incredible opportunity to showcase what makes the city so great. And all of our partners, both public and private, have worked enthusiastically with us to do that. So absolutely nothing at this point. But as we move forward into the process and once we start the international promotion stage and really get to have more of a public-facing presence around the world, then there'll be lots to do.
Okay. Any information coming out from any of our competitors or something that we need to know about? Is there anybody becoming lukewarm, or have you heard?
As I think,
No, I'm just curious. No, I'm nosy.
Since we
Do
last
some trash talking.
Since we last met, I think you all know that Rome withdrew from the process. So we're still in this competition with Budapest and Paris, and they are full steam ahead. So our goal, as always, is just to continue to push ourselves to elevate the product and make the best presentation we can.
Okay. Members, any other questions?
So,
Mr. Price?
so who now is in the race then? It's ourselves in Paris?
And Budapest.
And Budapest?
Okay.
The Eiffel
Mr.
Tower's overrated.
Krikorian?
Really small point, but on venues, we have the magnificent USC Galen Center, and we're using it for badminton. That's it. I ask this actually more broadly. I'm assuming that part of this is diversification of risk, the fact that you're not overloading venues with multiple events, because if something happens, you can easily move it then to one of the others. Is that the idea?
Our risk managers sitting behind us are surely nodding their head very vigorously. That is one of the great risk profiles of our bid. And I don't know if you've ever seen badminton live.
Badminton's a great sport.
It's
fun.
a huge sport here and internationally.
But you could
There's a
do
huge
more than
community
badminton at
in
a
support of
facility like
badminton.
that.
We absolutely love badminton, and we think the Galen Center would be an incredible place to present it. So it's going to be pretty spectacular if we get it.
Great.
Okay. Then, and again, thank each and every one of you. We look forward to the next report. That should be in a few weeks, I guess. And we're getting closer and closer to go time, I guess. So I want to thank you again for all of your work. So members, then without objection, we'll adopt the CAO and the CLA report. Erica, is there any additional business that's before this committee?
That completes all items before the
Okay, then we are adjourned. Thanks to everyone.
And the Eiffel Tower's overrated.